And a good day to you, Explorer Nation. John Lynskey here with another edition of Looking Back with Lynskey. And I'll tell you, this one is special. This one means a lot to me. One of my oldest friends, dearest friends, Dade County Teacher of the Year in 1994, Florida State Teacher of the Year in 1994, Bob Costas Writing Award winner, English teacher extraordinaire from the legendary class of 1981. It's my pleasure to introduce the venerable Dr. Shawn DeNight. Shawn, welcome, buddy.
Well, John, it's always an honor to be in your presence. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, man, we go way, way back. You know where all the bodies are buried.
Well, John, I'd like to say, as you were very graciously recognizing my teaching career, that it was probably in the classrooms at Columbus High that the seeds of my becoming a teacher were planted. And I'd say that they were probably planted in a multitude of ways, but probably like you, I looked back on my high school education and I really admired so many of my teachers in such a way that I wanted to be a lot like my teachers. And I think that's how I ended up here. I never majored in education, but I remember it was your mother of all people who told me when I guess I was in my senior year of college and I didn't have a major. I didn't have great employment prospects either. I was waiting tables at TGIF Fridays.
Fridays in the falls.
Yes. The falls, yeah. And your mother said, and maybe your mother noticed something in me that she noticed in you. She said, why don't you get yourself over at Columbus and why don't you put in an application? You'd probably be a good teacher.
And she probably also said, how hard can it be?
And I have to give credit to my alma mater, not only for being the place where the seeds were planted, where I developed a real admiration for teachers as real people, but also they gave me the chance without a teaching certificate, and I'm sure it's probably different nowadays. They gave me a try, and the advice I got from Mr. Fred Panzer, I don't think he was the one who invented it because I've heard it in other teaching circles. But I was 20 years old, soon to be 21. And I graduated with the class 81, and I started teaching at Columbus in 1985, 4 years and 3 months later. And Fred Panzer looked at me. I didn't have the receding hairline that I have now, or the salt and pepper.
Yeah,
he said, "Kid, don't smile at Christmas. They got to think you're mean, and they got to think that maybe there's some kind of consequences for bad behavior. So get your best poker face on." And I got to tell you, that was some pretty good advice.
He's a sage, wise man.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Columbus that you attended. We had a great conversation the other day, and you reminded me that the Columbus that I went to, that you went to, was made up of big families, lots of brothers from different parts of Dade County, and yet somehow we all came together in this melting pot at Columbus High School. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, John, I was honored to be invited by Mrs. Nancy Husted's family to be present at her induction into the Columbus Hall of Fame just probably about a month ago. And instrumental in Mrs. Husted's induction was Dr. Carter Burris, who pushed for her to be there. And Dr. Burris asked me to speak a little bit about what it was like to be at Columbus and to be Mrs. Husted's student. So I said that when you got to Columbus as a ninth grader, you came there maybe as a member of a very distinct tribe. Because I recall these these tribes, these hordes of Catholic boys all showing up in Westchester. And one group of them was very surprised that these kids existed, that there were the Italian farm families from Homestead.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Valenti was in my class, and Eric Torrisi was in my class, and the Damaris were there,
Yeah.
and there Charles Chrissy. And like all their names ended in vowels. You're like, what? They're supposed to be a cowboy. These were Italian kids. Their ancestors came there to plant the great tomato fields there. So that was one tribe that you might have encountered at Columbus. And I say that, John, you're part of this tribe, and I am marginally. These were the hordes of Irish kids from South Dade. I don't want to say Homestead, and I don't mean South Dade all the way down in South Dade, but to say that these Irish kids were from Pinecrest might put a polish on them that
there was no polish.
Deserve. So
no
we'll call these the Perrine Irish.
Yes.
That these hordes of, I was just a small family of 5, but the Lynskeys with 13 and the Desmonds, I don't know, is the Desmonds with 9 or 7?
I think it's 9. Yeah.
Yeah, 9. The Mertiduses with 7. And so that was our tribe. Was our tribe. But then we learned that there were these kids from Westchester who's either came with their parents from Cuba or they were born here soon after emigrating. And their lives in Westchester were a lot like ours down in Perrine. Some of those Cubans told me they called themselves the Bayou Cubans, which meant they were kind of the Hellraisers, I think. There were also the Coral Gables Cuban kids that were a little bit different than the Westchester kids there. And then there were just kids that came from other places. But I said when you got to Columbus, you kind of hung around your own for a while. And I said that Dr. Burris, it was kind of, I guess, apropos that he nominated Mrs. Husted to be in the Hall of Fame, because if you got into Mrs. Husted's European history class, most people agreed that you were probably pretty smart. I mean, don't get too much, don't think too much of yourself, but you can handle the reading and everything. But Carter Burris, usually, he was the first one to recognize if there was like a light of civilization somewhere in you, because judging by your family, he might have said no, because Carter taught my older brother Michael.
Yes.
And, he knew that Michael was of a distinctly different tribe than I was, even though we were part of the Irish hordes. And Carter would call some of us, he would say, "Oh no, you're a scholar. Your brother, he was a buffoon, but you're a scholar, and you might not have recognized that about yourself." And I said that I appreciated that when you got to Columbus, you didn't have to remain inside your tribe, really. I mean, they're always your people, but they didn't have to be your only people. So
your only people, exactly.
You could end up like I did, and I said this in high praise to the Columbus that I attended, that when I was there to kind of represent Mrs. Husted's family, I was there with some of my class of 81 classmates. One, a graduate of Harvard, another, a graduate of Harvard Law, another, a graduate of Brown University. And they did kind of nod in agreement when I said that my freshman year of college was, I guess for me, a bit of a disappointment. Somewhat anticlimactic, because as a senior, the education I received at Columbus is I had English, AP English literature with Brother Edmund Sheehan, who was our principal at the time. But I think he's as great a scholar as you'll find on any college campus. We had European history with Mrs. Husted soon after. We had philosophy with Brother Eugene, and you were kind enough to share that book about the being called I.
Yeah.
And no one ever invited me in all my prior existence to think like that. We
Mhm.
had calculus with Mr. Roach, whose 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 alumni are designing rockets, and they're in Detroit designing cars. And I went to Spanish class with Mr. Adams. So I had perhaps one of the most civilized, elevated educations ever. So when I went to the University of Pennsylvania my freshman year, I felt very kind of, not that I was displeased with the education I got there, but that was just to speak at how high a level of education I received at Columbus in the late 70s and early 80s.
Those names you just mentioned are cornerstones of Columbus, and it goes a long way in reminding people this is before the Moss Scholars Program and all the stuff we have now, that Columbus took average kids and gave them above average educations and got them into the college of their choice. I mean, who would have thought you'd be going to UPenn?
My father graduated. My father grew up on the other side of the river at Camden Catholic. So
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
I got in on some kind of dispensation.
Legacy or something. Yeah.
But John, what you're saying there, it was before the Moss Scholars, and it was before the football program and all the other sports programs were the dynasties that they were. There were a couple kind of flirtations with greatness back then. But just like you said, they took average kids. And you told me this too. If you're just an average Catholic kid and you go to Columbus thinking you're going to play sports, well, there might be a position for you third string in a non-skilled position, because Columbus has evolved. I mean, it's probably as famous as some of those national schools that you read about. Catholic, many of them, Bishop Gorman in Nevada, the one that LeBron James went to in Ohio. So life goes forward, evolution happens. So the Columbus that exists now probably is producing more scholars than before. But maybe you're saying it was maybe it was more unlikely that some of us would have achieved scholarship back then, if not for Columbus.
Well, yes, because at the same time, there's lots of our friends, if it hadn't been for Columbus, they would have gone to jail.
Well,
There's that.
yeah. So, some of them very close to us, closest being our brothers. Our brothers, yeah.
Yes. Never arrested, just detained, you know. There's a difference.
Well,
Um,
it was the spirit of the times, John. I like to say that the 1970s were a very anti-authoritarian era in American history. And what else could spurn the DeNight boys to be hiding on one side of a hibiscus hedge and lobbing mangoes into 112th Street? That's something that if I caught my own child, and if my father would have caught us doing it, he would have wailed our little behinds.
yeah.
But I have to say that there were behaviors like that transpired on the Columbus school bus. If you ever had the honor of riding the school bus back into Perrine, where there were some kids smuggling water balloons that they were hoisting out the back window, that resulted in some innocent motorist having a shattered windshield from those nice boys from Columbus. It was the era, John. It wasn't the school. It was
Yeah,
the 1970s.
absolutely.
It was anti-authoritarian.
It was a different time. It
Yeah, it was
truly
a different
was.
time. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. I knew I wanted to be a teacher when I was in ninth grade because of Carter Burris. When did you know you wanted to pursue education as your passion, your career?
Well, I think I probably was fighting against it my whole life, but my father had a very frank conversation with me. I don't know if I was probably in college at the time, and I said, I'm not sure I want to go into business like my brothers did. He goes, well, it's probably a good thing because short people like you never do well in business. So, I grew up that way. You kind of took the truth of certain statements. You weren't hurt by it. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure that interested me at all anyway. But I thought about the things that really brought me joy. And I think I discovered through Mrs. Husted the work of Joseph Campbell.
Oh, yeah.
Some people might know as the great authority on world mythology. And somebody once asked Joseph, a Catholic himself, they asked Joseph, they said, "You've studied all the world's religions, all the myths of the universe, and he was good about finding commonalities between these very disparate religions." And they asked him, they said, "What's the truth? Like, what's the wisdom of the world?" And he said, "If I could boil it all down, I could say that, you need to follow your bliss, that true religion is guiding you to a kind of enlightenment that he described as bliss." And I thought about the things that I really loved. And I loved learning, right? Because I had such great teachers. I liked the schedule of being a teacher, right? That was something.
Yeah.
But I like kids, and maybe having grown up among so many families, yours being a legendary one. And for those of you who are Mr. Lynskey's fans, I don't know if you knew that Mr. Lynskey grew up in what might be described as a barnyard environment, in the sense that there were 13 Lynskeys. And the Lynskey parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lynskey's, let all the kids have their friends come over to the house. There were no restrictions if like someone else had a friend over. So all 13 kids usually had a friend over. And what you didn't know about the Lynskeys is they took in stray dogs, and every Lynskey had his own dog. So at any given moment in the Lynskey household, there were 39 beating hearts. So John grew up in a barn-like existence. There were like 26 kids, his brother's friends, and his sister's friends, and then everyone had their own dog. So John, back to that liking kids really mattered a lot, and that came out a lot to me among a lot of our teachers there at Columbus. Carter was one of the great ones, that you learned your world culture in a way that was a lot of fun, because I think Carter always imagined, what was it like being on the other side of the desk? What was it like receiving this? So his class was always very engaging like that. And then I have to say, there's this thing about teachers that there's something about us that loves the underdog, that we see someone or something that might not be as polished as everyone else around it, but the teacher sees something there, and the teacher wants to develop that. And I felt that a lot among my teachers. And if I could single out Mr. Adams, poor Mr. Adams, he had to teach Spanish to the Irish hordes.
To the gringos, yeah.
He didn't teach Spanish to the Spanish-speaking kids that made up at least half of Columbus when we were there. So I sat through Spanish 1. Well, I had Spanish 1 with Mr. Panzer, but Spanish 2 with Mr. Adams, and he had to suffer through all these, the knuckleheads. We're not going to mention any names, but, Mr. Adams would every day try to initiate conversation with some of these boys. ¿Cómo estás? And he would say their name in Spanish, and the knuckleheads would look to another knuckle and say, "What's he saying?" And that was 7 months. But Mr. Adams never gave up on these guys, John. He always thought that he might be able to teach them Spanish. And I feel like this kind of eternal optimism is something that served me well as a teacher.
Oh, absolutely. And, as you said, after the conversation with my mother, which I will remind her of,
yeah, please.
You go to Columbus, and of course they hired you. It didn't really matter if you had a teaching. I never took an education class, period, in college, not one. So, Brother Edmund hired me over the phone. It was like that. So you get there, you're there for a year. You did well. You obviously had a career at Columbus if you wanted to go that route. And I'll never forget the conversation when you came in towards the end of the year. And to paraphrase it, you said, "Look, this school doesn't need me. There's lots of great teachers here. I'm going to go someplace where I'm really needed. And you decided to go into the public school system of Dade County, and you ended up at Edison High School. And while I was, surprised, I wasn't shocked, because that's who you are. And what you just said about reaching kids and polishing the rough edges. What better place? You don't need to do that at Columbus. But honestly, a goofy Italian, Irish, white guy going to Edison High School, man, but you made it work. What was, I mean, listen, I would have been fired teaching ninth graders. You're going at Columbus, you're going to a public school, Edison, with boys and girls. How did you prepare yourself, or can you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I gotta demystify a couple of things, John. Is anybody who's tried to teach sophomore boys at Columbus will know that that's not an easy road to rake there.
No.
Especially as an English teacher, required reading in 10th grade is Romeo and Juliet. So when I tried to teach Romeo and Juliet to a bunch of sophomore boys at Columbus, I realized that that might have been one of the greatest education challenges that I'd ever faced. So going to Columbus, going to Edison High School probably was the result of a few things. And one, you do remember that conversation, and I didn't mean anything by that to say that there was not good work to be done at Columbus High School, because let's face it, no matter who you're teaching, you don't know where that person's going to end up, and you don't know how they're going to use your knowledge. So I'm the product of a Columbus education. So I am very thankful for the educators that remain there. And I was very touched when Marcus Lemonis went out there. I never had the privilege of meeting Marcus, but when he singled out Mrs. Call and Mrs. Como, who followed Mrs. Husted in the female teaching ranks, and he pointed out to Jimmy Desmond's family, Billy Desmond's family, who took him to school. So that was something special, But going back to what you said about, me going off somewhere else, that's kind of part of Joseph Campbell. Not to say that, I'm an apostle of Joseph Campbell, but he talks a bit about something called the hero's journey, that, in your own life, you have to be the hero of your own story. And, I thought about what I was doing there as a teacher, and I received a lot of compliments from the parents of the students that I taught there. But, I think there were seeds planted in me that always thought that, a teacher like me, I wanted to be like Sidney Poitier, who just died.
Yeah. And
when I watched To Serve with Love, and I saw that, and it kind of flipped the narrative of it's usually the white teacher going into the black school. Sidney Poitier, the black teacher going into the working class school in London. And that's the heroic story there. You take a group of kids that maybe society doesn't view as worthy, and you get in front of them and see what you can offer. And I have to tell you, when I got to Edison High School, it's not like they were waiting for me. A lot of great work was already being done there. I was kind of late to the game of wanting to be in that environment. But, part of the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell is you kind of go out into this unknown world. And I was going into a world where culturally, you're right, I was not in my cultural environment that I grew up in. It was a school that was probably 97% black, half of the population there. It's grown, but half of the population was Haitian.
Yeah.
And again, if I think about growing up in the 1970s, where were some of those seeds planted? Well, you and I both played Little League football. And I think Bill Bradley, the great New York Knicks player, it became a U.S. Senator. At a time where our society was split, segregated, even today, those remnants exists, but on the athletic fields, black and white kids came together and no one seemed to think anything of it. And I played for Grant Miller over there at the Kendall Broncos when you were at the Sunnyland Optimist. And Grant was famous for bringing kids in from the surrounding communities, from Richmond Heights, from Goulds, from South Miami Heights, to play with us kids, the Pinecrest kids. And, I didn't get exposed to a lot of black people growing up other than that. And I developed a lot of friendships that way. And then I had another kind of seminal experience going to St. Louis church. We were the era that your parents, like, if you missed church, you had to bring, if you didn't go with the family, you had to bring home the missalette or the bulletin. And some of your brothers would go in and steal it after church, but then your father would ask you what the homily was about, right? But I remember, John, and this was really a seminal moment for me. I was in church, and our church did some kind of exchange with St. Mary's or with the Church of Notre Dame in Little Haiti. And at the time, our Bishop Lynskey, he was the pastor of that church. And they sent a Haitian music and dance group, the spiritual dance and music in St. Louis. And I saw girls in beautiful skirts dancing barefoot in the aisles. And I just thought that this is something that I probably need to learn more about, because, in the era that we grew up in, Haitian people were maligned a lot. They were seen as the boat people. And if you talk to Haitian people, they'll tell you a lot that our society always kind of looked down on them. And when I got to Edison, I was just so thrilled to be kind of immersed in a new culture, gained a lot of respect for that. And I was happy to say that the kids, the Black American kids, the Haitian kids, there are a lot of island kids there too, that, I could do my work there. And the one thing I got to say, and you're giving me this platform, is when I started teaching at Edison, this speaks to just kind of some of people's preconceptions about life, is that if you told anyone you went to Columbus or you taught at Columbus, the next response from someone would say, that's a great school. That's a great school. And if I told you that I taught at Edison, they go, oh, tough school, such a bad school.
Yeah. Okay.
So it makes you question, well, what is the definition of a good school? Is it a school that takes kids that are already well on their way to success because they were born into a family with values, with connections, with assets that are going to lead them to success? Is that the good school, or is the good school that takes the kids that are born on the wrong side of the tracks, born into societal prejudice, and that you can convince them to develop their education as high as they can, and that they become who they want to be? So maybe we could say they're both good schools, but I really fought against that all my career at Edison, this talk of, oh, that's got to be a horrible school. And you know what? Maybe I helped perpetuate that myth somewhere in my own upbringing, but I made it kind of a mission to kind of say, well, it's not really like that. Let me tell you about some of our students, some of our teachers. And I'll tell you, the woman I married, the one of the things that endeared her to me is that when she found out I taught at Edison High School, she said, wow, I'd love to come there and watch you teach. And she did. Yeah. And a very different experience than I got. So I figured she and I were probably soulmates in some way. So that's probably the long answer to your question.
Let me say this about Jane. You clearly outkicked your coverage on that one. So congratulations.
Martinez reminds me of that all the time. Yeah, he does.
On a serious note, clearly your hard work and dedication paid off, because you were honored in 1994 to be named Miami-Dade County Teacher of the Year and then Florida State Teacher of the Year. That had to be, in all seriousness, a tremendous feeling of gratification and accomplishment. How did
Well,
you find out about that?
well, it's an established process. It's been in the school system for quite a long time. And the first the first Dade County Teacher of the Year who went on to become the Florida Teacher of the Year is a woman I was lucky enough to have met. And there's a school named after her, Barbara Goldman.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so this process exists in schools. You're nominated by your colleagues. Some people might say it's like a beauty pageant kind of thing, but I do say that you have to write a lot in your application, and I think that my ability to articulate why I like my profession, why I admire so many other teachers, I think that came out in my writing. So my writing was enough to get me maybe into the next round. But the rubber hits the road when you get like a team of 10 people that come into one of your classes unannounced. You don't know what class period they're coming in, and they stay there and they expect the students to just keep paying attention to you. So it is a bit of a competition. And, having grown up among the Irish hordes, having grown up in Little League football and having to fight for your food at the table, I
Yeah.
guess I appreciated that competitive nature of it. And I was happy to advance, and I was happy to win because, I got for a year at least, I got a bully pulpit. I got to talk about the things that went on. And I got to tell the story of Edison High School, where I was when I was the Florida Teacher of the Year. And I got to tell that story in a lot of places. And I hope I got to change some people's minds about things. And I'd like to think that there's some people that, like you, I have to tell you this, John, I'm teaching at Miami High now.
Yeah.
And two of my colleagues here are Columbus graduates, and they're younger than me. And when I asked them, first of all, the answer to this question is almost the same answer. It's the same answer for both of them. I asked them separately. I said, "Hey, what made you want to be a teacher, and who was your favorite teacher at Columbus?" And the answer was John Lynskey. So those guys' name is I've got a Rivero here. He was a baseball player at Columbus. I don't know his first name. I have to check. It's either Ralph or Ralph. I might be confusing with someone else. And then Fernando Padilla is another guy. And you've taught so many, you might not remember all of them. But to think that you were the inspiration for this next group of teachers, and this is like Jesus with his apostles. He's like, look, you guys can't stay here in church. You got to go out there and you got to.
Yeah.
And your boys are out there, and they're not just here, John. I know that there's dozens of them in the Dade County public school system, and it's because of you. It used to be because of Carter, because of Mrs. Husted, because of Brother Edmund or Mr. Adams, right? But you're one of them now. Yeah.
Well, it's what we do, right? It's why we do it.
Well, it's like I think it's one of those kind of unexpected benefits of the job. But you might not know how much those kids were paying attention to the way you were teaching that class or the way you were teaching their classmates, but something or another. And I'm happy to see, John, that the profession of teaching is gaining more respect, and that it's not as surprising to see people want to be teachers. I hate that quote where it says, those who can do, those who can't teach. I mean,
come the hell with that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think most people know that's that's a fallacy. But think about if your own children said, "Dad, I'm thinking about being a teacher." I was lucky to grow up in a family that my dad had an aunt who was a teacher. My mom didn't have any teachers on her side, but when I told them, they were very proud that I would go that route. Nobody tried to talk me out of that, No,
and I appreciated that as well. I mean, my old man was completely supportive of me going into education. Jim was going to be the businessman. That's fine.
Yeah, he can do that. Yeah.
Yes, he did. As we know.
Yeah. Made
sometimes legally.
several fortunes, John. John, I want to just remember Big Jim there for a moment, because I think about Jim a lot,
Yeah.
not just in his present state, but I think about Jim always. I often say that the greatest hits of Jimmy Buffett are the soundtrack of Jimmy's life. That one line that made enough money to buy Miami, but pissed it away. So
he did that several times.
Yeah. John, if we could just take this commercial break to recognize that as a businessman, your brother made 4 separate fortunes. Separate fortunes. So as good as you were a teacher, he was as good as that as a businessman.
He made 4 different fortunes in 4 different countries,
yeah.
Down in the little latitudes. So, okay.
John, he did piss them away too fast, but he never regretted that. I think there's another line later on in the song that says they didn't regret it, and then they found some other happiness somewhere else. But we gotta recognize Jim for being part of this crew here, right?
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. So 16 years at Edison, then you go to Miami High, and there is another paradigm shift for you.
Yeah. Now, John, you should know this is a kind of inglorious part of my biography, that I was what they called involuntarily transferred from Edison High School.
Yeah, I wasn't going to touch that.
I'm just happy to tell this story, because some people might know about education policy and things, and they might not know where it leads. When I started teaching at Edison High School, they had a student population of 2,300 students. The pride that a lot of families had in being an Edison graduate was as great as the pride that many Columbus explorers had. They wanted their kids to go to school there too. It was a treasure in the community. People will tell you that during the McDuffie riots in 1980, that there were people in the community standing in front of their school, in front of Edison Middle and Senior. They were untouched during the riots. So what the community recognized as being a very solid asset changed during political changes that happened not just in our state, but throughout the country. And I'm not saying that this change was wrong. It was the accountability movement that they wanted to see what, for all the investment the state makes in schools, and it is the largest single expenditure in a state government budget. Yeah. What are they getting out of it? One of the unintended consequences of that was the mislabeling of schools. So for the first 5 to 10 years of what they called the A+ plan in Florida, you could predict the A schools in any Florida county, and you could predict the F schools. The A schools were all in the highest income earning zip codes, and the F schools were all in the lowest income areas. So did we need an accountability program to teach us that? Well, the bright side of that is that the accountability movement started studying accountability more. And at the time that I was at Edison, and I was involuntarily transferred because I presided over our English department for 4 years, which our school got an F from the governor's accountability plan, because we were judged solely on 2 measures. How well did our 10th graders do taking a test called the FCAT? Yeah. And how well did our 10th graders do on a test taking a test called FCAT reading? So most people would say here we can introduce this saying. I think they said once about the Bush men that they were born on third base, but they thought they had hit a triple. So if we can say this about people like you and me, that we grew up in very privileged circumstances.
We did, no doubt.
We were reading at grade level, that we grew up with books in our homes. We grew up with material resources that most of the schools were deemed F schools, were in the most impoverished areas of Miami. And nobody wanted to hear that poverty was an excuse. And it shouldn't be, but the accountability system changed. So now one thing that happens in all accountability measures of schools, they want to know how your bottom quartile's doing. So that means that in any school, whether you are in the richest school district or you're in the poorest, we want to know how the whole school's doing, but we want to pay particular attention to your bottom quartile. Did you write those kids off? Or are you still trying to teach those kids and elevate them? And after I left Edison, I was happy to see that over the years, Edison got up to being rated a B school, and it once was rated an A school, as it should have been, because they changed the criteria.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So that's a very good point about, how you measure success in education.
Absolutely.
Because the impact you've had on those kids' lives and the ability to get kids to read and write in today's world. That's a whole nother story. So this is what I'm thinking, because there's a lot of other things I want to talk to you about in terms of how you teach, what you teach, influences, how teaching has changed. And I've done this several times. So I think what we should do is we're going to call this part one.
Okay.
And in the coming weeks, we'll reconvene and do part two.
That's great.
I want to dive into, what you like to teach, how you like to teach, your favorite authors, getting kids to actually read books in an era where paper doesn't exist anymore. We have so many. I'm looking at your whiteboard. You're still writing on a whiteboard. I mean,
I do have a Promethean board that I make good use of, but I still use the chart here. Yeah.
You know what? Some things never go out of style. I don't care how much trends change in education. Yeah. Teachers still need to get up and teach.
Amen, buddy. Listen, the only time I sit down is after school, so I teach standing up too.
God bless you for that. So, and I want to talk about the fact, and I've never called you this except because now I have to, Dr. Shawn DeNight. How about that? We'll get into that. So,
okay. John, in Hollywood, they'd say if a first movie has sequel potential, it attracts more investors. So if you're saying we already have a part two lined up, I think I'm really pleased with that.
I can't wait because there's a lot of things I want to get into. I learned a lot today because, as you know, I spent my entire career at, a very prestigious school. Yeah, sure. We had knuckleheads and buffoons and everything else, but yes, there's money at Columbus High School. Let's face it. You were in a different situation, and so I've learned a lot, and I want to continue down this road. So if you're willing,
dude, I love it. I'm pleased to be in your presence, and I told you that when I was nominated Teacher of the Year, I got to talk about this profession, and I think the profession. I told you there's a lot of progress being made in this progression. But we still need to educate people about what goes on in classrooms, what it means to have an important teacher in your life, and why we need to support all schools, private, public, charter. And if they're doing a good job, we should recognize them. But if they're not, they should be singled out, as my Edison was unfairly singled out in a much more demanding accountability environment. And I'll tell you, there's schools out there that some people might call them good. And I'd say, well, you give me your definition of good and let me go in there and collect the data on it. So
I have a couple schools in mind, but we won't go there.
Yeah, now. We won't go there. Okay.
Amen to what you just said.
So we'll talk by phone to line up part two. Okay.
We absolutely will. It's been my pleasure. And part two is coming soon. So Explorer Nation, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of high school education in Miami with my dear friend. 50 years, brother. 50. How does that happen? So, I mean, I had hair when I first met you, you know?
John, I didn't have any of this, buddy. My hairline went down to here.
All right. Thank you,
All right,
Shawn.
buddy. I'll
We'll
call
talk
you.
soon.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell my mom that story, what you said. She'll love it.
Amen.
All right.
See you,
All right.
buddy.
So, Explore Nation, take care of yourself and Adelante.